Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for this second People's Commission. The first People's Commission was held earlier this year on January 29. This is a project of the Duke Energy Accountability Coalition. Commissioners on the coalition come from the 6 states in the Duke Energy service areas and bring a wealth of experience to the work of this coalition. We will hear testimony today from experts on the front lines, people who have spent decades making the case for clean and equitable and just energy production, transportation, and treatment of the ultimate consumers. Before we move into the program, I want to introduce our commissioners who will join us today with questions. We are joined by Rodney Sadler, Lane Boldman, Lisa Matz, and Bryce Gustafson. Thank you for being with us today and participating in this commission. Let me give a brief overview of what will be happening today. We will first be hearing from a number of witnesses, excuse me, who are directly in the line of services from Duke Energy. Those witnesses will receive questions first from the commission and then from the audience. Let me draw your attention to the question and answer button at the bottom of your screen. If you will submit your questions there, at the end of the program today, we will be answering as many of those that we can. Those that we may not get to will be posted on the website. So if your question is not answered in the course of this event, please check back on the website and you will be able to see answers there. Our first speaker today is Kathy Buckley. Kathy is the statewide director for the North Carolina Alliance to protect our people and the places we love. She began climate work as a Boston area transportation planner and became a climate reality leader in 2013. After moving to Raleigh in 2017, she founded a chapter there. Kathy envisions the time when all humans revere and respect their common home and all beings on it. Thank you for being here, Kathy, and we are anxious to hear your information.
Thank you, Chair Chavis, and good day to you and your fellow commissioners. I appreciate this opportunity to testify. I will address the divide between Duke Energy's platitudes and policies in regard to a clean and just energy future, one that swiftly addresses the climate emergency, the gap between what Duke Energy proposes and what we need. I recently watched a Duke Energy ad, and I was convinced clean energy, closing down coal, this is the company for me. But wait, Duke Energy is a monopoly. I have no choice. Why are they even advertising? Their ads proclaim that, quote, our energy future begins now, unquote. Yet their latest plan calls for fossil fuels to dominate the North Carolina scene well into the future and to linger years beyond 2050. Please note, while Duke Energy pledges to be carbon neutral by 2050, this does not mean carbon free. Duke Energy's ads tout their shift beyond coal, yet it may be 2049 before coal is no longer a source of energy in North Carolina. And Duke Energy plans to switch many of those plants to fossil gas, called natural gas by the industry. Switching from coal to fossil gas is going backwards. For fossil gas, given present leakage rates, is a worse climate pollutant than coal. Scientists say fossil gas as a share of energy sources must fall 20 to 25% by 2030. And yet, Duke Energy proposes to increase the use of fossil gas between now and 2035. Duke Energy's refusal to lessen its use of fossil gas is one of several grounds cited in a formal solicitation asking Duke Energy shareholders at the corporation's annual meeting this coming Thursday to vote Chair Lynn Good and Michael Browning off the Duke Energy Board of Directors for failures on climate performance. Solar. North Carolina was number 2 in solar in the country, right after California, well, not right after California, but after California. Thanks to a 2017 law that Duke Energy supported, we are now at number 3. But what is our potential here? If North Carolina was doing as well in rooftop and community solar as leading states are, we could quickly produce more than twice the solar energy we do right now. Offshore wind. That's forecast in a major US study to become North Carolina's majority source of clean energy. Duke Energy does mention it in their latest plans, but with caveats about its potential. Meanwhile, offshore wind is already a reality in the United States and has been a viable source of energy across the Atlantic for years. Energy efficiency. Duke Energy proposes to do even less work on energy efficiency now than in their previous plan. North Carolina ranks 27th among US states in home energy efficiency. Greenwashing does not get us closer to the renewable future we need. Better to spend those advertising dollars on community solar, energy efficiency, conservation, lessening the energy burden. The possibilities are plentiful. Saying that Duke Energy is moving us at a leisurely pace toward a clean energy future is misleading. They would have us go backwards, substituting fossil gas for coal, which is only good for Duke Energy's bottom line in the very short term. What we do between now and 2030 will likely determine whether what we do after 2030 even matters or not. Mother Nature rules. Accepting Duke Energy's rules would be a fatal distraction. Increasingly, we are all seeing the greenwashing for what it is. Our North Carolina Utilities Commission scheduled a public hearing for March 16th of this year on our state's utilities plans. The commission then had to schedule 5 additional hearings because over 200 of us registered to testify. We are joining forces and coming together to advance our common goal, a just and clean energy future for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you for sharing those remarks. That gives us background as well as possibilities. And I look forward to the answers to your questions that you will receive now from Rodney Sadler and Lane Bowman, commissioners who are here to dig deeper. Rodney?
Thank you so much, Commissioner Chavis. And I also want to say thank you, Kathy, for your honest and sincere testimony. It is wonderful to hear you speak from your heart about what's going on. You mentioned in your testimony that you think that we need to move from fossil fuels as soon as possible, and that Duke's plan seems to deter that. I'd love to find out, why do we need to move from fossil fuels as soon as possible? And what do you think Duke has as an advantage in delaying this shift?
Well, the shift from coal to, again, what they used to call, what the industry calls natural gas, they were calling it a bridge to the future. And if there were no leakage involved, it actually would be producing less carbon dioxide than coal. However, there's tremendous leakage. And this fracked or fossil gas is primarily methane. Methane is an extremely powerful climate pollutant. It, over a 20-year period, it is 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide as a chemical to hold heat in our atmosphere. And over a 100-year period, it's, quote, only 30 times as powerful. And yet we don't have 100 years to deal with this issue. If this were 1989 and the parts per million of carbon dioxide were 350, that's the last year we actually were at 350, That would be one thing, but we're now in 2021, parts per million are well over 400. So we don't have time to gradually change. We have to stop. You know, as a colleague said to me yesterday, if we're burning it, it's creating pollution. And when you look at the, you know, where we're putting this, you know, this pollution, you look up at the sky, it looks infinite. But the area where our weather is created is only about 10 miles high. So wherever you are right now, imagine someplace 10 miles away, and going up vertically instead of horizontally, and you'd reach the upper limits of where we're creating weather. So we really have to stop burning gas, and this, you know, this gas is so much worse than coal. Coal, of course, has things that are really horrendous. We don't want to stay with coal because, you know, it hurts lungs, it hurts lots of things. But we cannot go from coal to fossil gas. We have to go directly to renewables. You know, we have to do it fast.
Thank you for that. But is there an incentive? Is there a financial incentive to stick with fossil fuels instead of renewable energy?
Yes, the you know, Duke Energy receives 11% profit on, you know, if they build a new plant, then they will receive an automatic profit on that plant. And we have to change the rules so that there has to be a disincentive. And of course, you know, Duke employees also have children, so we're really all in this together. It's not like, you know, and Duke shareholders are being told that, well, we have to make sure your dividends keep coming in. You know, they have children too. I think if everybody understood the ramifications of what's being done by Duke Energy in the name of short-term profit, then we'd all be on the same page.
Oh, thank you so much for those questions and those answers. Lane, I know that you have something else to learn more about.
Yes, Lane Boldman, Kentucky Conservation Committee. Kathy, thank you so much for your work, and I really appreciate it. As a carbon-intensive state that we have here in Kentucky, I'd be interested to hear if you could expand a little bit more on the distinction between carbon neutral and carbon free for our audience. Sure.
And, you know, thank you very much for this question and you know, and the other question, commissioners, because you're hitting, I think, at the heart of the matter. I'm going to start with an example. If you're an individual and you decide, and most of the folks who are watching, you know, today are people who really are cognizant of the climate crisis, and you try to cut back on your own carbon footprint. So let's say you decide to trade your car in for a smaller car. Now, if you wanted to be carbon free, you'd keep going in that direction. I'm not going to fly anymore. I'm not going to eat beef. I'm going to stop eating meat. And if you were going for carbon neutral, you'd say, okay, I can trade in to get a smaller car, and then I can fly more, or then I can eat more steaks, and you kind of, you know, keep it the same place. So that's what carbon neutral is about. It's about not, you know, it's about not going higher. But you know, again, at this point, this is not, you know, this is not a time when we can be going slowly. So we have to really plummet our you know, the pollutants that we're putting into the atmosphere. So when we talk about putting a price on carbon, you know, making fossil freeze more, making fossil, you know, fossil fuels more expensive is a good thing. But if we're basically saying, you know, you can pollute here, but you can't pollute there, then, you know, if the amount of pollution going up is the same, then we're really in trouble. So we simply have to stop. I'll give you an example. You know, here in North Carolina, we have 3 utilities, really. 2 of them are owned by Duke Energy. They're called Duke Progress and Duke Carolinas. There's a third one called Dominion, which is primarily in Virginia, but also covers Northeast North Carolina. And what they are doing in conjunction with a meat producer called Smithfield is converting the methane that's created by swine and piping it into a facility and converting it so that we can use it for fuel. So they're actually double counting it. So they're taking methane out of the atmosphere, which in and of itself is a good thing. And they're counting that as, you know, as offset. And then they're also converting it into what they call renewable natural gas. And they're counting that as well. So they're double counting it. And what does this mean? It means that they are still going to be producing these, you know, these fossil fuels, but they're going to have to, they won't have to do as much solar. They won't have to do as much wind. So they're really pulling us away from a 100% clean energy future.
Okay, thank you so much for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
And I thank you once again, Kathy. And just as a little note aside, the new name for that renewable natural gas is factory farm methane gas. So we're calling it what it is rather than making it sound like it's good for the environment. Well, thank you so much, as I said. And now we will hear from Heaven Campbell. And Heaven is the Florida Program Director for the nonprofit Solar United Neighbors. She brings her passion and experience in program management, volunteer management, research, capacity building, diversity and inclusion, and evaluation to her work supporting solar initiatives in the state. She's a native of Florida and proud to say she's #fresh from Florida. She has a Master of Science in Family, Youth, and Community Sciences. And Heaven, we are so glad to have you with us today. And I do like fresh, so welcome fresh from Florida.
Thank you so much for having me here today. In Florida, Duke Energy is actually in the midst of a rate case right now. In this rate case, they're proposing raising their minimum bills to approximately $30, which is more than double what it currently is. We're really concerned with this because this harms the most vulnerable ratepayers. It also harms solar customers that have invested their money into a clean and budgeted future and elected to go net zero. They will now be punished for creating a more resilient neighborhood grid. And in this rate case that I mentioned, they've proposed it as a settlement approval. So what this does is avoid a full rate case proceeding, and practically speaking, it's going to be challenging for interveners or other interested parties to come in and advocate or amend the rate case. Duke Energy has not even had a fully litigated rate case since 2009, so it's been a long time. As a result, Duke Energy Florida's average residential customers, if this is approved, will see a bill increase of 3 to 4% just in 2022, so next year. The ACEEE recently ranked 52 of the largest national IOUs, and Duke Energy ranked 48th on energy efficiency, which is a huge problem that we see with this rate case. They're investing less than half a percentage point to energy efficiency, which is below the Southeast average of 1.64%, which is already really pitifully low. 54% of our electricity in the Southeast and here in Florida is residential, which is actually the highest in the nation, which means that we really need to invest more in energy efficiency and in residential solar. A lot of people like to say that we have really low electricity rates, but we also have a really high energy burden. Utility scale solar is slightly cheaper than residential solar, but not whenever it's sent to us, to the ratepayers. So IOUs ask our Public Service Commission, IOUs being investor-owned utilities, to rate base their infrastructure, including this utility scale solar. And then they do something very surprising and sneaky. They ask us ratepayers to subscribe to their utility scale solar. And that's the second main focus that we have here in Florida on Duke Energy. And that is their utility scale solar subscription programs, like I like to call them. They would call them community solar. So we focus really heavily on preventing misinformation and educating people so that they're empowered to advocate for better solar policy and for their own rights, their energy rights. This includes advocating for true community solar. That's not currently legal in Florida. However, the term is being consistently applied to utility scale solar subscription programs, such as Duke Energy's recently approved Clean Energy Connections program. In addition, programs like the Clean Energy Connection have been really splitting the clean energy and environmental nonprofit sphere. And that's because we do believe that more solar is great. However, this is not benefiting the most vulnerable ratepayers. So other environmental nonprofits, people that we commonly work with, like Earth Justice, they're intervening in this and saying that this is only going to benefit large corporations like big box retailers, and people who actually elect to not subscribe at all to the program are going to have higher bills as a result of the program. So along with the League of Latin American Citizens of Florida, they have intervened in this to point out some of these big flaws that are going to have big financial impacts. Those are our main focuses on Duke Energy Florida and what they have been up to.
Thank you so much for all of that information. And now we will move to our commissioner questions. And I believe that we're joined by Lisa Motz. And Lisa, please dig deeper.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And Heaven, I really do appreciate that testimony. Lots of great information there, especially frustrating, I think, to hear about how Duke rate hikes are going to happen in the wake of the lack of emphasis on community solar or utility scale solar, as you say. It's a recipe there for disaster in many respects, not just higher prices. And I wanted to ask you more about that, because I think that, you know, like us in Ohio, I work for Ohio Citizen Action. We have very limited community solar. And so we definitely feel for our friends down in Florida. But one of the things, you know, I'm hearing is how much misinformation is coming from Duke in terms of community solar, in terms of what real utility scale solar looks like and the good that it could do on so many levels. And I'm just wondering if you might expand a little bit more on that, because I think there's some confusion out there. And because I think this is a very attractive option for consumers on so many levels if the misinformation wasn't getting in the way.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. And it can definitely be a lot to unpack and a little convoluted. So it's something that they take advantage of. And really, there's a co-opting of the term community solar. In other states, especially Maryland is a great example, as is Minnesota. You can see community solar at work, and that's where the community truly owns a solar garden or subscribes to a portion of solar and then gets those direct benefits. In these utility scale solar subscription programs, we're seeing purposeful dilution of what that truly is. And people are presented with an option to subscribe to solar with no upfront cost. However, there is an additional charge on your utility bill rather than having direct benefits immediately. And then whenever you do see those benefits in, you know, maybe 7 years down the road, they're really minuscule. And whenever you combine that with hedging off true ownership of residential distributed solar, which is a direct path to wealth building, then you really have a recipe for financial disaster in some instances and blocking off those pathways to, like I said, wealth building and financial savings for customers.
And that wealth building obviously is key when we're talking about typically underserved communities, particularly communities of color. I know you spoke about that a little bit in your testimony, and I really appreciate that element as well.
Yeah, and that's why we're seeing those interveners in this program. They're really pointing that out, and they're saying not only does this not benefit those communities that need it the most, even if, you know, I do nothing, I choose not to subscribe to the program, I'm still being stuck with the bill in some form or another because our Public Service Commission does allow them to rate base those farms that then they're asking you to subscribe to as well.
Thank you so much, Heaven. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Heaven. And I have a question related to what you were just discussing, because you did talk about the communities with disproportionate impact and what all this means for the people of Florida. Do you have an example of a community response to Duke's records toward the ratepayers, something that can give us an example of how ratepayers and communities can act back?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have two examples. Like I mentioned, there are community groups like the League of Latin American Citizens that are directly intervening in their request to the Public Service Commission for approval of that Clean Energy Connections program, which is that utility scale solar subscription program. And then there is also the ACEEE, which really focuses on energy efficiency, that has been really awesome at calling out Duke Energy's inability to bring up their energy efficiency programming, which is really key to having clear pathways for people to save on their energy bills. We have extremely high energy burden here, and we also have really high heat indexes, right?
And I think we also have a little one there who's just as unhappy with Duke Energy as we are.
Oh, you took the words out of my mouth, Lisa. As a mother of four, it's good to hear those voices. So please don't worry about those sounds coming across the speakers. And as Lisa just said, that's the right kind of response to what we're talking about today. But I do appreciate all that you've shared, and especially from the position of how ratepayers can get engaged themselves and not feel like it's out of their hands, because so often we hear there's nothing I can do.
Right.
So I really appreciate what you shared with us today.
Thank you, and thank you for your understanding.
I think all mothers understand that, and fathers. And now we will hear from Jennifer Washburn. Jennifer is the Council on Energy and Environment. She is the Council on Energy and Environment for Citizen Action Coalition of Indiana. She's the first staff attorney and has been in that position for 8 years. She represents CAC and other nonprofits before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, mainly in energy efficiency, power plant construction projects, rate cases, and other resource decision proceedings. She also teaches a seminar in the public utility regulation and deregulation at Indiana University McKinney School of Law. Jennifer grew up in Greenwood, Indiana, and majored in Spanish and elementary education. And Jennifer, it sounds like you have so much to add to the discussions that we've already had, because the process of rate paying is complicated, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, commissioners. It's a great honor to be here. CAC brings 2 grievances against Duke Energy Indiana, our state's largest electric monopoly utility. The first relates to Duke Energy Indiana's most recent Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. An IRP is supposed to be a robust, unbiased analysis of how the utility should plan its resource mix for the next 20 years. In other words, it's the place where you'd expect Duke to model transparently and align itself with its corporate commitments to and public statements regarding clean energy and sustainability, especially here in Indiana, where Duke's service territory is a 90% reliance on coal for energy, and virtually all of their energy and capacity is fossil fuel based here. Unfortunately, that is not the type of behavior and honesty we get from Duke in this resource planning. The problem is that while the words in Duke's IRP report and public statements say one thing, the actual technical modeling files underlying the report do not match that narrative. In Duke's last IRP, Duke said they modeled coal retirements, but they made a conscious decision not to model the retirement of their most expensive and highest CO2 emitting plant, Edwardsport's integrated gasification combined cycle, which has cost ratepayers up into the billions of dollars now. And it did not allow the retirement of any other coal units for 6 years into the future. This caused Duke to miss at the time the limited and expiring renewable energy tax credits. It was not coincidental, it was deliberate. Duke also said, we're considering wind and battery storage. But when you look under the hood at Duke's modeling files, which they don't expect you to do, you learn that Duke limited wind and battery storage to just 250 megawatts per year without any basis for doing so. Duke said, we're modeling solar in our IRP. But what they don't tell you is that they added $5 per megawatt hour surcharges onto solar for no reason. biasing the consideration of that resource in Duke's model. And they simply used much higher prices for wind and solar than are justifiable. And Duke said, we're considering energy efficiency and conservation. But when you look at the modeling files, you check their homework, and you see that Duke priced energy efficiency at unreasonably high costs and otherwise inserted flaws into its modeling and prevented the greater selection of our lowest cost resource and fastest way to combat climate change, low cost energy efficiency. To add insult to injury, Duke even used an unrealistically low capital cost for gas combined cycled units to grease the wheels for the selection of a gas plant in the future, continuing its addiction to fossil fuels. This has turned out to be a devastating result for Hoosier ratepayers. In this 2018 planning exercise, Duke Energy Indiana didn't have any of its other aged coal plants slated for retirement prior to 2026. It selected laughably low amounts of wind, solar, and battery storage, had meager amounts of energy efficiency, and selected 2,480 megawatts of gas before the end of the planning period. As we all know, Duke is known for not working within its best interest of ratepayers, and that is how it played out in Duke's last IRP resource plan. CAC would also mention another new development. Duke has recently announced that it sold off nearly 20% of Duke Energy Indiana to an entity wholly owned by the government of Singapore for $2.05 billion. Yet Duke Energy Indiana ratepayers have no guarantee of anything under this unbalanced proposal. And while Duke continues to say that the proceeds from this extraordinary ask will accelerate its clean energy transition, it has committed $0 to that and $0 to Indiana. Thank you for allowing me to present this.
Thank you, Jennifer. We know that the IRP process is so complicated and complex, and it's good to have someone who understands that with us today. We will have our questions for Jennifer, and I think that on docket for the first question is our Commissioner Lisa Motz.
I think, sorry, Commissioner Chavis, I think I've got the first question here.
Okay.
Jennifer.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong order. Yes,
No
you do. You do.
Thank
Go
you
right
so
ahead,
much.
Rodney.
Jennifer, it's wonderful to hear you talk about what's going on. And so interesting to hear that some of the same issues you have in Indiana are issues that we have in North Carolina as well. One perhaps that's different is you said that 90+% of your production still comes from coal. That sounds extraordinarily high and definitely need change. As you were talking, one of the things I heard is that it seems as though they're intentionally suggesting that the price of providing fossil fuels is less than it is, while intentionally suggesting that the price of providing renewable energy would cost more than it does. To what advantage is this for Duke? Why would they make such a disparate presentation of the costs?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Because logically speaking, you would think that they would be fully supporting their corporate policies, but that just does not happen. What essentially they're doing is when they're trying to build and hold on to their coal plants, they're earning a rate of return off of that, and they make just much more money building these capital projects rather than more of the lower cost resources that may be built by a third party developer, and then that cost is passed on through to customers, and they don't get as lucrative of payback from customers by going down that route.
So it almost sounds as though you're saying Duke makes money by building fossil fuel plants more than just by generating electricity.
Yes, I would say that's accurate as we see them, and with all of these environmental compliance projects on coal plants and whatnot, they like to hem and haw about the amount of having to put on these retrofits to the coal units, but every Band-Aid that they get to put on a coal plant ends up being more money in their pocket.
Well, that seems as though it's counterintuitive and doesn't get us to a clean, renewable energy future where we need to go. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your testimony.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And now we have Commissioner Bryce Gustafson with us. And Bryce, I'm sure you're full of questions. Please.
Yes. Where do I start? Jennifer, thank you for your testimony today. As you mentioned before, as I understand it, in Indiana, Duke has no accountability but to themselves in these IRPs. What changes would you like to see in these processes to give Hoosiers a better outcome, both in financial and environmental terms?
Where to start? Great question, Commissioner. It's really not about just disincentivizing the fossil fuels, but we want to really have regulatory reform, which doesn't only incentivize utilities for how much they spend, but it considers how they're spending that money. And we are helping re-look at the structure here so that Duke isn't making so much money on the fossil fuel investments. And I'd say that in terms of reform and improvements on the process, transparency is a must. Duke needs to be held accountable, and the IRP process should be binding. It is an informal process as it stands, which means that we don't have a lot of weight that we can throw around to actually enforce them into doing the right thing. It ends up being what they call a collaborative process, but that just means that we have to just be on them the entire time, trying to get them to do the right thing and stay true to just letting the model do its work. Let the science, let the data win and prevail, rather than having Duke put its thumb on the scale throughout the entire process. And the utilities, particularly Duke, our largest electric utility in the nation and our largest in the state, they shouldn't be allowed to speak out of both sides of their mouths. The corporate policy should be reflected in the IRP. It's false advertising, and enough is enough.
Thank you very much. It sounds like the fox is guarding the hen house here in Indiana. So thank you again, Jennifer.
Thank you.
And to that point, Bryce, I think from what we've heard of the comparisons across the states, especially today with Indiana and North Carolina, we have multiple foxes guarding multiple hen houses, it seems. So thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been, it's so nice to have it explained in a way that an average person like myself can understand, because you did handle a very complex topic today. And with that, we are ready to move to questions from the audience. And we have some that have come in. And at this point, all of the speakers and commissioners are live. So anyone can answer questions if you indicate that you're interested in that. If one is directed to a special speaker or commissioner, I will indicate that. And the first question we have is, and this may be a question for an attorney, how can Duke sell critical infrastructure to a foreign government in Indiana? And I'd like to put a little pin in that to expand it a bit, because I've been reading there's more than Duke in Indiana that has been selling infrastructure to foreign states, and it's not something just happening in Indiana. So could you reflect a little bit on that, Jennifer, in terms of legality and how that happens and how citizens aren't aware of it?
Absolutely. It is a head scratcher, to be quite frank. Right now, Duke has this request and their partner pending before FERC. And we have intervened along with Public Citizen and Sierra Club to try and hold them accountable and let FERC know that we're unhappy that Duke has these arrangements, makes all these public statements and commitments to to the public and to the ratepayers. And ultimately, when you look through the actual written documentation, you see that ratepayers are guaranteed nothing. So it really is a head scratcher, and I think it does come down to having some leadership with our lawmakers and within the state of Indiana and nationwide to really put a stop to this. The monopoly service territory structure is somewhat sacred. It was created by the state of Indiana. It's it has a value because it is a state franchise monopoly. And the fact that we are now divvying that up and selling it to the highest buyer, let alone one that's out of the country, is really concerning. We've seen this happen with Vectren, now Centerpoint. They sold out to a Houston-based company, and we're just starting to see the slow trickling out of, or just this slow progression of Hoosiers losing control over their monopoly utilities. So it's a head scratcher. It's very concerning.
And it seems that even though it's a public utility, there's no requirement for them to inform the public that they're doing this.
They have made some announcements and they've made some filings, but in terms of them being truthful about what's in those filings, they have really fallen short.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thank you so much for that answer. We need to get our heads together, I guess, figuring out how to challenge what's going on. And now we have a question for all of the speakers. What do you think is the biggest barrier to public understanding of how Duke makes its money as a barrier to rallying public support for reform? That is open to all. So if you will raise your hand if you want to speak. Commissioner Sadler.
I was just going to say, I think the biggest barrier that someone like me faces is a lack of understanding. Since so much of this stuff is done off the radar screen, and we don't really know how things are going on, there's a significant educational gap. I think we all need to be educated about the way that our energy is produced, the actual cost of such energy, and the way that we could begin to move towards 100% renewable energy in a way that might be much more efficient. I think if people actually knew the real details, we might move much more quickly towards 100% renewable system.
Mm-hmm. So transparency is crucial.
Yes, it is.
Any other comments? Lane and then Kathy.
Yeah, the other part of that is just more transparency in the process of public participation. You know, the companies have been around a long time. They know how to send out the messages they feel like will sell the best. But the public is really, it takes an effort for the public to engage in any kind of comment period. People are busy, they're working during the day. So having an advocate or having more advocates that can help be a bridge between what Duke is doing and what the public is asking for is really helpful. So that's a large part of what would help make that bridge happen.
Mm-hmm. Kathy?
So Duke Energy takes our money and does lots of things with it. One thing they do is they buy these ads on television. So, and of course, you know, most of us working for nonprofits don't have those kind of funds, so we're not going to be competing on TV. So they're sending out messages that are very false. They're also making huge contributions to our state legislatures. They're also working as lobbyists to write legislation that supports their model. And they don't, you know, I read one of the integrated resource plans that was submitted in North Carolina. It's 400 pages long. It's incredibly complicated. It's, I think it kind of is confusing. If Duke Energy really wanted us to understand what was going on and what their plans were, they could put out a 35-page report, including all the assumptions they make about the cost of solar and batteries and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And choose, you know, but they're not doing that. If they really wanted to tell us what was going on. Just to mention one other thing, you know, I talked about methane. That 400-page report, both the Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress, neither one of them have the word methane in them. And that's, of course, the main issue we're talking about, in terms of their adherence to fossil gas.
Well, we addressed the barriers, but it was good to hear that there could be solutions. And so hopefully we can find ways to integrate those solutions into the conversation with Duke and holding them to a higher accountability. We have a question in North Carolina and Indiana, are the incentives for new fossil fuel plants in state law and need legislative action? Or is it a regulatory issue and the commission can change it? We have two Indiana representatives here, so I'm going to toss that ball to Jennifer and Commissioner Gustafson.
Sure, I'd be happy to take a crack at it. It really comes down to the more they spend, the more they make. And given that fossil fuels are more expensive than renewables and energy efficiency, it unfortunately translates into them making more money when they go after those resources and get a specific rate of return off of those resources. So I think regulatory reform is important, and strength within our regulatory bodies, within our public utility commissions, to really hold their feet to the fire. I think going back to the prior question, inserting more public hearings, hearing from ratepayers, and incorporating that throughout the entire IRP process, throughout the proceedings, is really critical and something that we don't do enough. It is really complicated, and it is really easy for Duke to deceive folks who aren't knee deep in this very technical, wonky world. So CAC works really hard to try and distill that down. We have wonderful experts that we use that help us look under the hood and understand exactly what's going on. That I like to say, it's like checking a second grader's math homework. You wrote down the answer, but how did you get there? And I think that's what we really need to do is with every decision they make, we really need to check their homework and make sure it makes sense. And we need to be able to rely on our government to serve that role. And in the meantime, CAC and great organizations like you all will be there to weigh in.
Commissioner Gustafson, do you have anything to add to those comments?
Sure. As far as, regulatory in Indiana, on the regulatory side, Indiana is one of 3 states that still allows our governor the ability to appoint our utility regulators without any public or legislative input. And that in our time at CAC, we've seen a revolving door in and out between the regulators and the industry. On the legislative side, just a good example with Edwardsport. Edwardsport could not have been built unless they changed the law to allow them to, it's called construction work in progress, QWIP, back in the early 2000s, which what that means is they could build the power plant and charge the customers as they were building. And that led to a power plant that they never proved was necessary, that they needed the power from, going from 1.9 billion to now over 4.5 billion, who knows? And people's rates all across the state, especially the folks that can least afford it, going up and up and up. So there's work to be done on both sides, but in my viewpoint, it has to be done statutorily at the State House to change the way that the regulators are regulating and how they're appointed.
And one thing and thank you, Bryce, that's spot on. It does remind me, CAC puts together a follow the money analysis tracking what our state legislators are receiving from the utility companies, and it's mind-boggling. I encourage folks to check that out because it just really shows that we don't even have a chance at our state house. It is constantly an uphill battle. we rarely see any glimpse of consumer perspective in legislation. When they are denied at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, they go straight to the State House. And it creates a really awkward dynamic where our commissioners aren't probably doing this as much as they could because of that threat from the State House. And not to mention the fact that, I mean, campaign contributions come into our governor as well, and there's a very cozy relationship there. So every way you cut it, it's a really tough thing for ratepayers, and cleaning up that and the campaign contributions, let alone redistricting and all the other things that are necessary to clean up our democracy, is really, really important.
And Madam Chair, if I could just jump in there,
Yes, please.
The campaign contributions piece, I think, is huge, and Kathy Buckley and Jennifer Washburn have talked about that. But don't forget about the trade groups, right? These energy corporations are using ratepayer money to buy their way into these trade groups that then themselves are, engaging in dark money politicking and lobbying and greenwashing that is not, in fact, identified as being supported by groups like Duke Energy. So it's a very convoluted web, and just further adds to, I think, the confusion that so many people have about how this whole system works and where they can insert themselves to be their own best advocate.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like, from what I've heard, that it is predominantly regulatory. And I did hear one comment that made the point that we might need more legislative action to put it in the public domain more. And it seems, because being from North Carolina, that this is a pattern throughout their service areas. And so there's definitely room for a lot more transparency. We have time for one more question. Kathy, see you had your hand up. Was that a comment to the prior question? Because I have another one for you.
Yeah, very quickly, Duke Energy spends about $10 million a year supporting our state legislatures. I listened to a public hearing once where one of our legislatures was talking about a bill and said, and the national, gas lobbying group supports this, as a positive. And right now I think we have a very good, relatively good utilities commission. So of course there's an incentive there for Duke Energy to go back to the legislature and say, okay, how do we hamper them so that we can get,
Mm-hmm.
get what we want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, the last question that I'm going to put forward, and let me remind the listeners that we will try to answer all of the questions, and they'll be on the website. We do have a few we won't get to because of time. But the last question is in relationship to the definitions of net zero and net neutral. They wondered if Kathy could say a bit more about how net zero is not zero. Another term the industry throws around. So how is net zero not zero? And
Yeah,
I direct that to Kathy, but anyone can pitch in at another point. Go right ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, it sounds good because it sounds like, oh, we're not putting any pollution into the atmosphere. But really, we're doing this so we get to do that. So it's, it's almost like, well, it's a level playing field. But again, we waited so long that we have to move tremendously quickly. I talked about how the atmosphere, it's not infinite, it's huge, but it's not infinite. But got to remember how much pollution, and I like to call it poison because it really is also poison, how much we're putting up there. We're putting up the weight of the Empire State Building in climate pollution, climate poison every 5 minutes. That's like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the year. That's the average that we're putting up there. So it's such a tremendous amount. We cannot afford to keep pumping it up at the rate we're pumping it up now. We've gone much too far. So we really have to reduce it as quickly as possible to zero. And that's not net zero. That's not, okay, we'll do less of this and we'll do more of that. It's really, we have to, if we're burning it, then we're creating pollution, we're creating poison.
We have time for any other quick comment on net zero before we have to move on.
Well, I don't know if I could say much about net zero, but I could say I would love to get to a true zero. I would love to get to a situation where we're relying on renewable energy sources, things like solar, things like wind, things like hydroelectric, things that are produced in the environment naturally that can produce energy for us, energy, all the energy that we need. I like to say we could move towards a cleaner, greener, better world if we make just the right decisions now. And we rely on, oh, I don't know, God to provide the energy that we need in order to survive. So I'd love to move towards not just a net zero, but a true zero.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for those words, Commissioner Sadler, because one of the truths about net zero is so often the polluting industry stays in already impacted communities and they can trade it off and not change anything except the numbers on the ledger book. So I thank you for those words of encouragement there of what we're actually going towards. And with that, like I said, I want to remind everyone that these questions who we did not get a chance to answer today will be on the website. And I want to thank all of our speakers and commissioners who participated. As you can see, the conversation was not just testimony about what is being done wrong, but there were many solutions, possible solutions offered. So we're moving forward to that place where we can celebrate not net zero, but zero. And that is something that I think we're all looking for, and that we are willing to work with Duke to reach if they're willing to allow us to come in and advise. Thank you all. And with that, we sign off. I'm Donna Chavis, and I'm chair today, and we're so glad to be with everyone and appreciate all of these good questions and the good information. Thank you.
Are we off the air, Carter? Are we?